Welcome to a special edition of DisruptED TV School Spotlight. I'm your host, Joe Pizzo, and today I'm shining the spotlight on the Global Read Aloud. This wonderful program is one which I have had the distinct honor and privilege to bring into my own classroom this year. The results for me were so successful that I just have to share them with you. The inspiration for the Global Read Aloud has happened purely by chance. English teacher Pernille Rip and her husband were listening to NPR on their car radio one summer night when the One Book, One Twitter project for adults was mentioned. Neil Gaiman was being featured on NPR, and he is someone who believes, as I do, that we have an obligation to read aloud to our children. He encourages us to do the voices, to make it interesting, and not to stop reading to the children just because they learn to read to themselves. Listening to Gaiman's remarks during that interview in the summer of 2010 inspired Rip to create the Global Read Aloud for students. In September that year, the project began with 60 facilitators reading aloud the French novella The Little Prince to about 150 kids. The program has grown to this year's more than 1 million students having a book in their grade range read aloud to them. The book I read to my middle schoolers is Refugee by Allan. I am a proponent of reading aloud to my middle schoolers, as well as my college students and PD workshop attendees. I know the power of reading aloud, but the impact of Refugee was something that has far exceeded my expectations. The novel deals with 3 refugee families from 3 different time periods: Nazi Germany in the late 1930s, Castro's Cuba in 1987, and war-torn Syria in 2015. The novel is broken up into small sections that rotate each of the stories. The descriptions are powerful ones, and the storylines contain a subtle series of parallel threads that are tied together at the novel's conclusion. I read parts of the novel aloud over a period of 2.5 to 3 days each week for 6 weeks. My students entered my classroom every day with excitement, asking me, "Are we reading Refugee today? Are you reading aloud to us?" And I would say yes, and they would cheer. When I had to let them know that I had to cover some other material as well, but I would read aloud to them the next week, the groan of disappointment resembled that often heard in a crowded sports arena when the home team doesn't succeed. During the 6 weeks that I read Refugee aloud to my students, I made sure that I would dramatize the work. They would sit on the edges of their seats, captivated by the powerful storyline that I was reading. Moreover, I would end a reading in class by delivering the final sentence and then snapping the book shut in dramatic fashion. My students would invariably shout, "No, don't stop yet," in a manner that would make a professional chorus proud. I'm in my 45th year of teaching, and I must say that participating in the Global Read Aloud has truly been one of the highlights of my teaching career. I wanted to have some data that would prove that my observations of my students' enjoyment of reading Refugee out loud to them wasn't just my impression. I gave my students a survey that I posted on Google Forms, and the results were even better than I could have expected. Over 95% of my students loved having Refugee read aloud to them, and they wish that all novels could be taught this way. Please know that I understand there is a place for silent reading. Even so, the results of my survey prove that reading aloud a high-interest novel can motivate not only my students to read more actively, but it has also done the same for my colleagues. At least 10 teachers and substitute teachers in my building have now read Refugee, and a group of my students is now reading other books that Allan has written. When a colleague or a parent says that our students don't spend enough time reading, suggest to them that they read aloud to their students. When the right book and the right enthusiasm from you come, the results are amazing. You can find more information about the Global Read Aloud and author Allan on their respective websites. I would like to leave you with the following quote from author Jane Yolen. "I read everything aloud, novels as well as picture books. I believe the eye and ear are different listeners. So as writers, we have to please both." For School Spotlight, I'm Joe Pizzo.